Welcome so much to the Existential Hope podcast. We're joined today by Aaron Mill. And Aaron, you're one of the world builders that joined our first ever world building course. And over 8 weeks, you built out an entire world. Maybe not an entire world, but it's meant to be somewhat like that. So yeah, welcome. And let's start with just introducing yourself. Who are you? How come you wanted to join this world building course?
Yeah, thank you, Beatrice. It has been a lot of fun. It was very interesting. So yeah, my name is Aaron. I guess by field, I have a background in mechanical engineering, and I joined the team at Allfit, the Alliance to Feed the Earth in Disasters, about more than 5 years ago. And I became very interested in global catastrophic risk, systems thinking. For that type of work, it was especially food systems, but also nuclear conflicts, for example. And while doing all this work, I was also very interested in positive futures, or what if we get it right? We prevent the worst, humanity doesn't blow itself up. And yeah, what are we striving towards? And that is where my interest came from, in visions for the future, I guess a bit of science fiction as well, knowing like, why do we do this even, right? And I'm also a freelance artist, so I've experimented a bit with this. So this felt like the perfect fit of combining creative means to work, maybe shape the world in a direction that I find worth striving towards, and also exploring and learning at the same time.
Yeah, thank you so much. We're very happy you're joined. And yeah, it's very interesting what you said. What if we get it right? I should maybe clarify that was like the purpose of this whole world building practice was to think about, a lot of people worry about AI right now. And like the main sort of prompt or challenge with this world was to imagine the world in 2045 and we have advanced AI. We don't have AGI. And so what does that look like if things have gone well? And so, yeah, I would be very interested if you could maybe try to summarize your world. Can you give us a brief overview? What world you choose to go for?
Yeah, so there were key developments there that are also closely linked to why this world does not yet have AGI, but I guess definitely in comparison to today, advanced AI systems. And that is through a tool we call voice, and I will elaborate in a bit, but I guess it's about democratizing all kinds of aspects of life, but also technological development. So in our world, it's basically projected outwards into the future, a tool that already exists today, which is open source, called Polis. And I'm just reading the definition out loud for the audience here. It's a real-time system for gathering, analyzing, understanding what large groups of people think, in their own words, enabled by advanced statistics and machine learning. So in a way, it's a tool that asks a bunch of questions to a lot of people, and it summarizes all the answers and keeps an overview of what is the preference space or the opinion space. And I thought to myself, so this open source tool right now, based on their website, can handle maybe 100,000 users. What if through advancements in technology, we could actually poll all humans on all kinds of matters and collect preferences, how the world would look like? And yeah, that was the key thing. Actually, recently there was, after I've written the story, a podcast aired with Connor Lee, the person working at Conjecture. And I'm like quoting very briefly as he's talking about democratizing technological development. He says, if we were a perfectly rational and competent species with extremely sophisticated democratic infrastructure deployed across the entire planet, that would be awesome if we could do that. But it's probably very difficult to do. And I guess in my world, I've described a pathway how we got there to this infrastructure system of having, being able to poll billions of people. And actually, I have to look up here for a second what the acronym VOICE stands for again. Because I've went through a few iterations, which was part of this world building course, right? Thinking about how can we do things. 1 second here. Yes. So VOICE is the acronym for Voice for Open Source Information and Community Engagement. That is the tool in our world. And yeah, in our world, as I imagine, it can be used, say, on the very local level. Maybe you have, say, something like a chat instance with your family and you could discuss what have we for dinner, and everyone just shares their preferences. And it might test for alternatives or make suggestions or summarize it, or you use it for a family gathering. You might use it locally, right? There's, say, a lot of effort, say, also around, say, protest or active democracy, where I would go if 1,000 other people would also protest. So maybe if everyone knows about that preference existing, then that kind of action can take place. Doesn't have to be a protest, could also be a spontaneous dance festival, whatever it might be, right? If 1,000 people are up for dancing right now, then that could emerge. But also on a national or international level, I could see this opening up trade agreements. So the idea here is the tool would also A/B test all kinds of different policy suggestions. Say you might get a prompt, right? Like people would spend like social media, blogging their opinions, tweeting their opinions. They would be prompted with things like, hey, would you be willing to pay 1% more tax if it would mean this and that outcome in your neighborhood or whatever it would be, and this on a national level. So this tool does a lot of variations of this. A/B testing, say, 1,000 people on that policy, then 1,000 people on another one, and finds the Pareto improvements, the win-wins, the positive sum games, where basically no one is really against or feels like they have gained a little, at least. So that is where the majority of the progress in the world comes from, in addition to a few other updates as well. But you, Beatrice, at the start, you asked me about AGI and why we do not have it yet in this world. Shall we get to that now?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, cool. So there's two key things in this world that contributed to there not being AGI yet. The first one being a pragmatic one, at least for the late 2020s, where we're heading right now, is that, say, the economic demand was for ever more localized, smaller models that you could run, say, a personal agent that for it to be like secure and private, people wanted to be able to run it on your phone. So there was like an economic incentives to have small, efficient models because they can already, as it turns out in my world, take over most of the productive tasks in the economy. And they're not yet at a threshold where they turn into AGI or ASI, artificial superintelligence. So that is one limiting factor, that the size has been at least not skyrocketing initially. But then also in my world, there happened, say, a humanoid robot-enabled terrorist attack around the year 2030, which caused the Robot Act, like a policy or a treaty, to come into place where indefinite context windows have been banned effectively or like extremely heavily regulated, which means that digital agents basically only have a short time span before they go back to their initial training state. So that means longer plans that need to be executed can't naturally emerge or like from the system itself, or it's very heavily regulated or challenged. And I'm sure some AI safety experts right now would say, no, they're like iteration or like ways in which minor increments or updates in the code, even with tiny context windows, can lead to catastrophe. And I'm sure that is true. Or I don't know better. Let's put it like that. But at least those were the key things that led to AGI not being developed initially. And then afterwards, with the amount of collaboration and voiced opinions in this world, they came also like a stifling factor, right? Given that it was now fairly easy for the world to raise a protest, share their opinions that they're not signing up for experiments in frontier models, that now it's on the company side or the developer side to convince the public, basically the whole world, that the next research steps are safe. So that is also why in this world, I guess it might land short on its full potential. There's like some growth limiting factors here because there might be, you have to convince a certain amount of safety first. Otherwise, there will be people who, demand that basically. And there's like a tug of war of opinions. But it's like a world where I would be like very happy to live in because it keeps like all the options. There's a lot of different potential for how to lead your life. Different countries do it differently, right? They have all kinds of, or like different cultures would have voiced different preferences, how their communities should look like, what kind of trade agreements they want to engage with. That is also why there's not yet ASI.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to hear you talk about this tool. It sounds it's a very good tool for building momentum and critical mass, like you say. And I also love that you are referencing the wind thing. We did have Liv, who has the wind podcast, on the course to talk a little about that. And I'll also hopefully hand you over to Allison soon, and she will dive into all the like different technologies, because I know you also have these like humanoid robots and I think increased energy in your world. So soon we'll
I'm happy to talk about some of those technological advancements as well.
Yeah.
I've almost sidestepped them because I feel like they're like not key for how people are living their lives, but it's actually quite the change in technology and how civilization looks like, say, from the outside. But it might not shape people's everyday life that much.
Yeah. So one thing I wanted to ask you, but you touched on it at the end, but do you have anything to add on, like why you think this is an existential hope vision of the world by 2045? Like, why is this future a desirable outcome for humanity?
Yes. So on the one side, it's way more prosperous than the world of today. We have basically achieved energy abundance most of the time. They're like just a quick rundown. So over the last about 2 decades, cost of solar and battery dropped around 90%. And projecting that forward, in the next 2 decades, I assumed another 90% drop in the cost. And basically that allows us to create energy grids in which we prepare with batteries and excess capacity for the darkest days of the year, right? Where it's very cloudy. We don't get as much energy from solar. So we need maybe say 5 to 10x our daily consumption in capacity to account for those worst days. But that also means that like throughout the whole summer, we have excess energy. And that means in this world, depending where you live in the world, you might have, say, 100 to 300 days in a year where the energy cost is zero, maybe even below zero. And it can be used for a lot of the compute that we're using to run this tool voice, but also for all kinds of intelligence or things people want to create, but also, say, for carbon capture, which is an energy intensive process, getting CO2 back out of the atmosphere again and storing it, or maybe shaping it into new products. So this is how the abundance of energy is being used. And that on its own creates a level of prosperity that we do not yet have today. But on top of that, I'm also prognosing a significant rise in humanoid robots that are able to do like 99% of your everyday tasks and therefore are basically entering the economy. And that leads to a drop of, or like an affordability of most basic goods. Material or like survival is basically guaranteed. In my world, it's on an exponential, the amount of robots we build, like an S-curve adoption, like a heuristic or an intuition pump here might be electric cars. How many have been built? And say over the last decade or so, a bit more, the amount of electric cars in the world has increased by 50% every year. It's like very rough. Don't quote me on the exact numbers, but roughly like that. And I basically ran the numbers, assuming this year we might build 1,000 humanoid robots that can do useful tasks. And there are like already like some startups that are posting like their trial robots where they might have already a crew of a dozen of them standing in their machine workshop. So by the end of the year, 1,000 humanoid robots seems plausible. And if we increase that just 50% year over year, that means by the year 2045, we have 20 billion humanoid robots that can work almost 24/7. So that's crazy. The implications of that, I guess, in my world, we assumed something like, also quickly here, it was not me who worked on this. I know often I said I here, just force of habit, but I discussed this also with my group colleagues. So yeah, imagine a we, right? Like sometimes it's mine idea, sometimes another person's idea. And I think we will be mentioned on your website where this episode goes up. So we had the idea this would mean, let's say, a 10x in our global workforce and maybe a 20x of our global GDP. That is why I mean it's like a very prosperous world to live in. And then why do I think it's desirable on top of that? So there is, in a world, a lot of the X risks are of the probability has gone down of the existential risk. Say, I mentioned earlier how this tool voice might enable also international collaboration. And yeah, I fantasized a bit and thought about what might be the impact here on deterrence and the paradigm there around nuclear weapons. And in that world, when you see like how much money we are globally spending on maintaining a nuclear stockpile, that's way in excess of what we actually need to destroy all our opponents or whatever it might be that we're targeting, then there's like a huge pressure for not engaging in arms races, in negative sum games, and therefore people would disarm, or like nations would disarm step by step, right? There might be some smart contracts, some form of proofs that basically I commit to reduce my stockpile of weapons by 5% if you reduce your stockpile of weapons by 5%, right? And so a lot of, say, this voice tool would create 1,000 of different steps there. We might reduce sanctions on trade, whatever it might be. The world becomes more interconnected, and therefore, yeah, it's a world in which a lot of possibilities are still there. Different communities might lead very different lives, but in a way, it's a safer world and a more prosperous world. That's the long and the short answer.
Yeah, that's great. Keeping the doors open, I think, is also a great way to think about it, because 2045 really isn't that far away, and there's so much more time to go after.
Yeah.
Do you,
sorry, just briefly, can I add to that? Yeah, because I guess my philosophy as well, and I know at the Foresight Institute, you sometimes have brilliant thinkers like Anders Sandberg and others who really go far into the future, transhumanist, and think about what are all the possibilities, even where we might go. And some of them weird me out intuitively, or they're like, oh, haven't thought about life in that shape or form or that pattern being interesting. But I could see how I might say each generation makes an informed step for, oh yeah, we want that. Some might want to merge with AI in some form or become a bit more like a cyborg, where others might not go that way. They might more develop on a biological way, whatever it might be. For me, it's just important that in a way that each step is informed, and then I'm cool with the process and trust where it leads. In comparison to saying, this is the desired future, I describe it to everyone, this is how we should lead our lives. I don't feel qualified to make that kind of statement.
Could you just, what is the most different in this world compared to the world today? And is there something that's just the same?
Let's see. Might be easier to start with what is the same. I still think like human connections a lot of them will still be the same, right? You still have families. You might talk as little to your neighbor as you do today, depending which community you live in. But there's still a lot of local things, and people probably share their preferences for local events. And I could see in some communities that leading to people coming closer together. But yeah, you still talk to one another. I'm bridging a bit the gap between what's different, what is very new. So I would also assume that this level of prosperity in combination with some form of social safety net, like a universal basic income that gets implemented in almost all countries in this world build towards the end of this period, that people spend more time on what they enjoy doing, right? It might be being outside, being with their family, just enjoying life, whatever that might be, right? Following a creative pursuit like I'm doing right now. Like maybe for the period while I was writing on this, I was working part-time and doing this, which was very enjoyable, right? It was just like this telling stories, like feeling free. Oh, I can almost envision anything here. Or does it fit? Obviously, you had some constraints, but in a way, a good game also has rules, right? And then it makes fun to play within the game, the rules of the game. So yeah, I would expect people to play, be creative, spend more time as they like. But I also think there's still some form of economy. People maybe, so we have a story here, a day in the life of Sophia, a woman in Argentina who is working as a calibrator because, say, these humanoid robots, when they're like supporting you in your household or different situations, they're not allowed to get updates from the internet as like a security measurement. And yeah, she basically was like to a household, calibrates it, showcase, do all other basic tasks. Do you know how to operate a vacuum cleaner, whatever it might be? Are they working? And then more specifically, she talks with the owner of the house about their needs, right? It might be, I'm taking care here of all my plants and I like my robot to cook me these traditional dishes. And yeah, there's, I guess, a lot of unique tasks in every household where this calibrator, for example, comes in. So that's one of the new jobs I imagine in this world. Yeah. Can you remind me of the question again, or want to go more in depth?
What's the most different from because you answered what's the most similar, I think what's the most different, but it sounds like maybe just the fact that we're like sharing the planet with robots, like there's two per human, right?
Yeah, if you assume like roughly 10 billion humans and roughly 20 billion robots, yeah, that would be the case.
Yeah.
So yeah, it would be a very different landscape, right? They would be like seemingly integrated over time. And I assume there would be like some communities that would probably straight out ban them and not want them, or they're like limited to work in a factory where there's no human left. But I could also see them being like common all across society.
Yeah. I'd be curious to hear in terms when you were working on this world, were there any books or movies or anything from the real world that sort of inspired and influenced your world build?
That's a good question. Probably the work Liv Burry does around Moloch and her podcast Win, that definitely inspired me. Also in the art I draw, I like to explore what I guess Moloch means, the god of negative sum games, how it manifests in society as, I guess, a metaphor, but also a useful concept to point at. So that definitely has brought up the need for, some form of coordination of preferences. Looking forward to that. So that's one thing. And I also, it came more from challenges. I'm not sure if they're like clear sci-fi ideas here. Like the humanoid robots thing, I think I picked that up mostly from looking at which companies are alive here and investment discourse. Like people looking at, okay, who are going to be the companies that build millions of robots and be like a huge manufacturer and therefore grow the most over the next decades. So that's more like financial discussions happening on other podcasts, which I was drawn to, I guess, from my mechanical engineering degree and background. I think that's really interesting, and I see there's a lot of potential for productivity increase. Which stories inspired this? Almost maybe like short stories, right? Like also or like quotes along the lines of love is that which enables choice. I felt like that was also a line that I had in mind while writing on this, that I still want there to be choice. And that means not going extinct, not having a lock-in of a few other things.
Yeah, that's great. I'll ask you one final question before I hand over to Allison, which is very briefly, because I know that you could probably expand on this, because I want to ask you about the timeline, because one of the things that we had exercise was we start actually at the world of 2045, and we think about what would the sort of most desirable thing that we can imagine for that time be. That's still like plausible. And then we did a backcasting exercise of like then thinking about, okay, how did we get there? And so I'd just be curious if you could just briefly touch on what were a few of the events that you thought had to happen in order to enable this world.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I actually have a few ideas here that directly came from this end goal of having this tool voice work and be implemented. We also had these red teaming exercise. How could this be manipulated, turned into the wrong thing? So first of all, I expect these AI agents or this kind of intelligence requiring a lot of compute. There has been like an addendum to the human rights that in my world in the year 2035, there's like the idea of a universal basic compute, because you basically need it to participate in this modern society. It's like your energy bill or like food. It's like a very complex world. So you need like some form of intelligence to help you navigate it. Or if you want to make use of your voice, right, democracy, then you need certain levels of compute to do that in a realistic way. So that was a thing that needed to happen. And I also thought about, okay, how can this not be like, say, manipulated by bot swarms, stolen identities, right? I think some of the people around the Foresight network are also exploring blockchain technologies, how they might be leveraged for different forms of collaborations. And yeah, I thought every person has like a unique token. I called them TOPS, trust of personhood. And it would be combining a lot of like different ways to verify you're a human, you're alive, and you just gave your preference, and would be somehow seemingly integrated, potentially in a smartwatch, or you have to verify from time to time. So that is the key thing that also needed to happen. And there needed to be a global standard of this. So in my world, there is a point at which they all merge in a way to one standard, because there were like different forks of the technology in place in different countries beforehand, but they unified that at some point. Then, yeah, okay, what caused the development of such a like sophisticated tool? Yeah, probably a real world need for it, and a lot of, say, governmental funding plus open source coming together, maybe some philanthropic funding as well. And I think like Taiwan is today doing a lot of interesting things on the front of digital plus democracy. And there's some great stories to hear how they, for example, responded to the COVID pandemic in 2020, how they had open source systems. So like, where's the stockpile of masks and hand sanitizer, things like that. And it was a lot of, say, citizen science, and it was open source. There was a lot of like integration of tools the society brought together, but they made it official through the government and the digital ministries. So I thought in this timeline, Taiwan might be the first government to put up a policy poll by where they preemptively say, we will abide by the result, and then let every citizen vote. So that is like a precedent. And the example is maybe not that important. In my case, it was, say, about AI tutors being used in the school system. What does society want? And they might have found a compromise. At least 80% of education needs to come from a human, or of the teaching needs to be done in person by a human. And that might apply for state schools. This in our world kicked off, say, an arms race of black markets, ID crime, people faking digital tokens of people who have recently passed away, or trying to find backdoors into the code. Yeah, then this like the end result of this voice tool, how it's governed or structured, I describe as not very creatively. We started up by saying we yet lack the words to describe it, but it's like a combination of, say, the Wikimedia Foundation, the Linux open source ecosystem, and like a DAO with some very clearly identifiable stakeholders. Yeah, what are the challenges to getting to a global preference-based optimizer that takes people's voices in? And yeah, that's how those things informed each other.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much. We really appreciated the way you leaned in for the entire course. And handing over to Allison to dive into more of the technology and exploring more of your world.
Yeah, thank you so much, Aaron. This was really fantastic. And I think while you were already at Vision Weekend last year, which is our annual end of the year festival, and you gave just a really fantastic art exhibit and a cave under the castle where we were. And so I really was very excited for you guys' world. And I think you definitely did not disappoint. It had so many different features in that are really at the heart of so many different Foresight collaborators. And it's really wonderful how you brought them all together. So I want to dive into a few of them a bit more in detail. One of them is the one that you already touched on, which is this kind of digital passport as an enabling technology here, that kind of came online pretty early on. And one thing that I guess many Foresighters would immediately say, what about issues of privacy and data verification and of being able to game the system? And I think you guys thought really long and hard about this. So I would love to hear a little bit more on your end, especially with the with the tops, but also with later iterations thereof as it grows more into the voice feature really. How do you guys deal with privacy issues? How do you guys deal with gamification of this? How do you guys deal with possible attacks? Do you want to share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that's very challenging and an interesting question. How do we solve this? So ideally, you would have, say, a system that is open source or transparent in a sense where people, or there's a global opportunity to look into weak points and what kind of information do we enter to receive, say, the token we want. And the idea is this identifier token contains a lot of different information around you. And the interface, depending on your preferences, would then share, I guess, only the necessary information. Say, two countries have now a lot of, say, trade agreements. Their borders have come down in practice because there's a lot of, say, exchange programs and increased trust, right? That might not be everywhere yet in the world, but we can certainly imagine that. Or say, easy thing maybe to imagine for Europe, the European zone. Then if I bought a flight, say that I'm from Germany, that flies me to France, over to you, to your Vision Weekend, then I would just show it and it would just confirm maybe I'm an EU citizen, but not who I am or whatever. Just I paid for this and I'm a real person. The flight agency, the company doesn't even have to know who I am, right? That might be wishful thinking, but maybe for flying because of safety concerns. But for a lot of points in the world, I would love there for something like that to exist. That's participating in online polls, right? They just need to know, did this vote come from a real person? And they might have very different polls, right? Say if you want to vote on a local city infrastructure project because they're trying to build something new, then that poll might have an additional requirement, needs to share rough location, that you're part of the city or something, that you have a stake in this, right? That the local community is actually voting on this and not a third-party proxy. So how would we do that? Those are a lot of challenges that probably need some sophisticated proofs to realize it. I could imagine it being quite a pain in the butt to frequently verify yourself, because some algorithm wars where it's, have you been are you really a human? Please verify every so frequency. But I guess over time it would get better, or it's a simple cost. Maybe, I don't know, I'm just brainstorming, say it flashes a pattern which reflects off your iris, and that video is there to encode something that's video data that's very hard to fake. Maybe someone probably working on this saying I can fake this. I don't know, but it might take into account a lot of other things, or it might be, say, I can connect with a neighbor, touch phones, whatever it might be. Yeah, can you please maybe repeat your question there? Because I feel I've been talking for a while.
Awesome. We're also not asking you to solve the entire thing. And I think what you point out is there will be a lot of kind of like wargaming, red teaming, wanted and unwanted ways in which the system is tested
Yes.
along the way. And so I think you give a really great kind of like iterative path to get more to that. And you've thought really quite deeply about that. Another thing that is perhaps like a little later in the timeline where you guys talk about the day in a life with Sophia. One thing that I really loved in this day in a life is the kind of role of voice, and specifically allowing people to come together in the physical world around shared interests. And I think this is quite different to the role that social media kind of plays in our current role, where it's very like interacting through these kind of like third party mediators in the virtual world. And I think it was really wonderful that you like emphasize this physical component, at least in the day of a life story, and not in a way where it was the same people coming together around the same kind of like set of preferences, very homogenized, but where actually like people can use voice to also explore people's preferences, learn about them, understand them better. And I'd love to, have you a little bit share either a bit more about the day in a life or just generally about this kind of like two-pronged feature of voice and allowing kind of preferences to like almost shine like an artwork and enabling a little bit more of this cross-cultural exchange.
Yeah, thank you. Briefly on the social media aspect, I imagine this world probably, say, it becomes like this viral thing. The webpage should go to, I don't know, which Harry Potter character are you, but it's more about the preference based. And a lot of social media platforms, say Facebook, Twitter/X, and Instagram, they need to integrate it because it generates a lot of traffic. So there might be like some interface next to your Facebook timeline or something where you can also just see the voice timeline or things like that. And it would be, given that's an open source project, there would be an API to request that, right? And it might look the UI might be slightly different on X than on Facebook or TikTok. But yeah, it would be integrated into different platforms, most likely, or like all kinds of devices, right? Like you might have microphones and speakers all around the city, the office, where people can just talk into, and that preference will be recorded in some database. That is on the social media aspect first. Next, you asked about the preference space. So I guess a thing I frequently see today on some timelines is like people sharing where they land on the political compass. And sometimes there are like a lot of variations, like the axes are a bit labeled differently. And I think that causes, in a way, a lot of confusion sometimes, or like disagreement, because people understand the labels differently. And it's also two-dimensional, whereas like, I don't know, say you might have an extreme view in all kinds of axes, but like on average, you're a centrist. Or you don't have any take at all in any direction, then you're a centrist as well. So there's a lot of differences there. And I thought, after I used this tool for a while, I probably have shared like thousands of preferences, right? Some people have shared like 10,000s of tweets. And it would create this radiant display of like my preferences and values. And I guess for people to check out the webpage, there's like an AI generated picture. And I could also see like it becoming fun for people, right? Like probably still some like tribe dynamics will be in play. I don't expect that to go away, but we have some more radical acceptance in a way, because it's almost like, hey, here's my rainbow of values. Yours looks slightly different, but we're like both a mess, so to say. Or we're like both contain multitudes, right? And there might be a lot of shared things as well. Like you might agree on 900 preferences about, we both like there to be more trees in our neighborhood alley. And on the national level, we both like the taxes to be spent like that. And then we only maybe disagree on where should the local water fountain be installed. And that's now where we debate. I don't know. Yeah, that is.
Yeah, I love that. I think also with the level of granularity, you can really zoom in and out depending on the kind of issue at hand. And I think that oftentimes what we promote on social media are often the kind of clashes where our values clash, but we don't often zoom out and realize that we actually agree on 95% of other things that we share. And I think by pointing out more also the parts in which these like beautiful colored compasses of our values intersect, I think you have a lot more space for enabling Pareto preferred interaction. So maybe you say, we don't collaborate on this water fountain thing over here, but we actually go in this space, zoom out in the compass, and let's do this thing over here. So I think it's almost pointing out a lot of like possible collaboration opportunities.
Yeah. I guess it's like not all rosy though, right? Because I could also see in a way the world just becoming more complex, and you realize, I don't know, I'm living in an apartment block and no one shares in a way the view that I have. But that's like the same for everyone. It's basically back to, okay, how do we get along on a lot of different things? Like at least what we see today is, even though there are like some cultures where some of their stated preferences might be like very opposite of each other, it's like hard to fathom how we might be able to combine that. Maybe step by step, and also by stepping out of this scarcity mindset more into the abundance mindset, because as the world gets more prosperous, everyone has maybe an increased sense of the future is going to be better and I will be safe, I will be taken care of. So we could see how that brings cultures together. But at least like today we see like almost all societies trade with each other. And like, I might not invite you to my home, but I'll like trade with you.
Yeah, I think obviously there's also privacy considerations, because I think much of the richness of our ideas also comes from being able to form them in our own heads and so forth. But I think as long as you have pretty open sharing settings and you can decide who you share what with, I think that solves some of that. I also wanted to ask you more about, we talked a little bit about how really these kind of like tools perhaps enable like a little bit more finding each other's Pareto improvements, or finding Pareto preferred cooperation opportunities. But are there also any residual risks that you might see? So for example, even if we, let's say, all got much better at cooperating with each other, are there perhaps like still some remaining existential risks? Because as technology is still proliferating, as we have a fleet of humanoid robots, as we definitely have like much more progress in other technologies, how do we make sure that we also are making progress on like the kind of like existential residual risk factor that is probably still to some extent on the horizon or prevailing in that world?
Yeah, good question. So I guess giving the prompt of envisioning positive future, we have written less about that, but I'm happy to share my thoughts. Yeah, I think there's a lot of challenges coming up. I'm also now delving a bit into the field of, say, autonomous weapons, what might be the implications there. Also, say, for command and control of nuclear weapons or biorisk. So that is a field I just recently started engaging a bit more with. So yeah, I think all of these things require probably some form of global treaty. It requires, work. For the increased power, we need some form of wisdom to wield it, and moral circle expansion in a way as well. That we, I guess, something easy for Foresight or like very natural is like thinking of future generations, like not discounting them, at least not too hardly. Then other sentient beings, right? Animals, things about the environment, species diversity, things we might care about. I hope there will be growth there. I think we have seen culturally the world in a way expand the moral circle over the last centuries. Yeah, the question is the pace of that quickly enough with our power to shape the world going double exponential? Probably not, right? So maybe, I don't know, maybe voice is like a pacifier. People just, they feel heard, right? They got to yell out their preferences and then they can engage in their society. And the tool is nudging them, right? That might also be the thing. Instead of, say, a downward spiral where you start from an inconvenience and end up at justifying genocide, you have an upward spiral where it's, oh, what can I learn from this disagreement? Or there's society's lacking in this aspect. How can I improve it? I like, say, if I share my preferences and I'm like ranting at the system, like about things I really don't enjoy, things I hate, it might come back with like useful solutions, right? Would you be happy if, I don't know, we do more of that in society, in your town? And I guess I would be like, yeah, I guess I would feel happy. That in my lived experience also seems to calm down people a lot. Brief anecdote, I used to work in a nightclub, and there were sometimes, just after seeing tens of thousands of people consume alcohol and dancing, some people get violent, a tiny minority, but it happens. And I was frequently good at just talking to them, hearing them out. Oh, I assume you're really upset right now because that person bumped into you. And they were like, yeah, I want to go in and punch them. Like, how about we go outside where I can hear you better, right? And then they just shared and calmed down. I feel maybe we can have that kind of effect of people feeling understood understood and having their needs met.
Yeah, and even for perhaps some of the existential risks that really require more coordination. For example, let's just pick the one that we already know, like nukes. Like we actually see no one, or most people on the compass, really, I would say 99%, hopefully a little bit more than that. We don't prefer a world in which everyone is extinct to nuclear weapons. You could almost use that again as a coordination device and say, okay, why do we have to have this race to the bottom here where we're just like stacking up more and more nukes if we're actually like literally everyone here on this planet doesn't have a preference to share this. So I think maybe it could involve some kind of like conditional trades or something that where you may actually get closer to that more people prefer. Yes.
I guess I have one thing to add there as well. We also see people who have their basic needs met also care about their environment, right? But before that, if it's about, say, I'm like at risk of starving, I will burn down the forest next to me and use it for crops or have animals live on it. And even if it's, say, a very diverse region like the Amazon, if I need that to survive, I will do it. Well, a lot of people do. But as wealth increases and basic needs are met, people start caring about that. Yeah, I value that too. Maybe not as much as my own existence, but I could see as we are getting more prosperous, we also care more about the world and more about peace.
Yeah, I love it. As we're nearing the end of this, I want to ask you if there's any feature that we missed in the world that you really want to touch on. And then perhaps to close, if you could see that world also influencing, if you've taken anything away from the world building, are there any features where you're like, oh, we could actually get there with a little bit of help or with a little bit of a push?
Yeah, I don't like, I guess a stepstone or milestone would be trying out the existing tool Polis right now. Like maybe some larger studies could get, try to grow that project, try to implement it. Maybe we can create a precedent for like direct democracy that utilizes these kind of tools. Maybe some philanthropic funding organizes or like funds the effort of coordinating 100,000 people to come together on a policy issue. Like that would be, in a way, democracy as we might have not seen on that scale yet, because usually it's about voting for representatives and where they have a lot of talking points, right? And that's all good. But this might be something I'm very curious in seeing. And also, just like to get this prosperous level of humanoid robots contributing, we need some form of liability. And I guess that also overlaps with frontier AI development so that we get to this future. Yeah, companies, organization, individuals need to be held accountable for any damages that might occur. And that will then also, in result, caution them on their steps towards progress.
I love it. Yeah, definitely much more Polis experimentation. It's so cheap. Anyone could do it. Anyone could spin something up like that. I really hope we see much more of that. And I think the Collective Intelligence Project already used Polis to inform, I think, some of Anthropic's public AI, basically the constitution that one of the models was run on, and with better results than if they had used the constitution that was built by the AI developers beforehand. So I think we see some really interesting precedents on this as well. Okay, is there anything in the final minute that we didn't talk about that you really want to put out there? Is there any one hopeful end note or something that you want to leave us with?
I think this is really possible. Also, the energy abundance, I think the combination of solar and batteries there seems very possible. And we need to make sure, what do we use all that excess energy for and or compute, right? Do we use it just to basically ask a huge data center for what brand of coffee should I drink in the morning? Or are we utilizing it to, run carbon capture technologies or, just other things that create value for society?
Love it. Thank you so much, Aaron. That was a really fantastic build. Really appreciate the work that you and your team put in there. And we're dying to see it come into existence.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Hopefully not dying to see it come into existence. We're living to see it come into existence.
Exactly.